What's up everybody, welcome back. So in the last video we did the projectile setup for our weapons, and today we're gonna finish the weapon setup by making sure our primary data asset actually works. So yeah, we're gonna do the last part of the weapon setup, and then we're finally ready to actually set up some combat behavior for our AI. So let's just take a look at the primary data asset. So we have our weapon component where we have been working in, and we need to make sure that all of these variables that actually change something on a weapon, we want to transfer them from our primary data asset into our weapon component. So we need to make sure that all of those variables also exist on our primary data asset. So I'm going to open up both of them. And then I'm simply going to go through the list over here to make sure that all of the correct ones are also in here. So let's just start at the top. That's probably the easiest. So we don't need the weapon, the animation instance owning controller. We can skip that. Is firing an AI fire weapon. Those are for the actual component, so we don't need to worry about those. Same for the current burst fire count. Then we have the weapon type, but that's already in here. We started with a few of these variables already. So next one, fire time and burst count. We do want to add those. So let's add them to the data asset, the fire time, and that's a float. And then the burst count, and that's an integer. Then we have is auto fire, so we also want that one, the burst delay, and the is shotgun. So we also already have the is shotgun bool, so let's add the is auto fire. So that's a boolean. And then we have our burst delay, and that's a float. So let's see the next one, the muzzle socket. We already have that one. Then we want the spread and the pellet count. Pellet count is already in here. So we need the spread, the maximum penetration, and the damage. So let's continue. Spread, that's a float. The max penetration, that's an integer again, but I'm gonna add the next float again first, and that's the damage, and then change this one into an integer. Then after that we have the trigger, so we don't need the trigger, that's the onWrap variable. The muzzle flash fx is already in here. Fire sound, we do want to add that one, so fire sound, and that's a sound base. So if you use a sound base, you can fill in a cue, a wave file, all those kinds of things. So that's the easiest option to pick over here. Is aiming, we don't need that one, so we can skip it. Then we have the two montages, the fire montage hip and aim. We do want to add those. So that's the hip, and that's animation montage. And then the fire montage for ADSing, so that's aiming. The weapon impacts, we can skip that one. The projectile class is already in here, and then is explosion damage. We do want to add that one, so we can specify that in our data asset as well. So is explosion damage, and that's a bool. So now we should be good to go for the primary data asset. So you can make categories to make things a little bit more clear inside of the actual data asset. So you can change the category over here. And then if you open up the actual data assets, let me see. So they will also be nicely organized under the correct category. So that may be a little bit easier to do. But I'm not going to do that in the video. You can do it for yourself and come up with whatever categories you want. So I'm going to skip that. Then we need to go back into our weapon component. So let's make sure our primary data asset is saved. And now we want to go to our begin play in here. And we want to set this up to make sure that the variables are actually pulled from the data asset and then stored inside of the weapon component. So we only need to access the data asset once. So first of all, let's do the part that executes on all instances. So those are variables that don't necessarily replicate, but we do want to make sure that each instance of our character knows the correct values. So we want the weapon type in here. So we can drag off our primary data asset and then get the weapon type. And because we're actually executing this on all instances, the variable itself does not need to replicate, and these are variables that do not change after they are set once. So that's why we can easily do it like this. So we're going to get the weapon type from our, oh, sorry, I already have that. So then we need to set it on our weapon component. So let's drag in a getter and plug everything in. So the reason we need the weapon type is because we use it in the onRep. Let me see, which one was it? Over here, onRep. So this also executes on all instances, and we're using the variable in here. So we need to make sure, excuse me, that this is set correctly for everybody. Okay. Besides the weapon type, we also need the muzzle socket, the fire sound, and the muzzle flash FX. So let's start with the fire sound. So we're going to pull that from our data asset again, get fire sound, and then simply set it on our weapon component, like so. Do the same thing for the muzzle socket. So the data asset get the muzzle socket, and then store it on our weapon component. Oh, come. The muzzle socket, that's over here. So then the muzzle flash FX. So let's get it from the data assets. Oh, really? And make sure it's stored on our actual component. And the last thing we want to do in here is get both of the montages. So the montage hip and aim. And again, we're going to store those on our weapon component as well. So montage hip. And the last one, montage aim. And store it in the correct corresponding variable. Already. There we go. So these all execute on all instances. So I'm going to drag over this box to make it a little bit more clear. And then we're going to continue to the server part. So let's make sure we hook this branch back up again, and this executes server only. So in here are variables that are only needed by the server or variables that will replicate. So perhaps those change during the gameplay, and then we want to make sure that the server sets those and replicates them. So there are a bunch we need to set in here. Let's see, we have the owning controller. So now we need to get the projectile class. So again, we're going to get all of these from our data asset and store them on the component. So the projectile class. And set it over here. And let's see, we have the fire time, the burst count, and the spread. So let's drag off, get fire time, and then set it over here. And let's get the burst count and also set it. So let's make sure we actually plug them in. There we go. And I set the spread. So again, drag it off, get spread, and set it on our component. Continue with is shotgun. So we're going to grab the bool from the data assets. Oh, freaking. And store it over here again. So is shotgun, plug it in, and hook it up. The maximum penetration and the damage. Get maximum penetration and get damage. So we have the damage over here and the maximum penetration over here. Plug everything in. There are still a few left. The pellet count and the is auto fire boolean. So let's get the pellet count. And get is auto fire. So we have the bool over here. Plug it in. Oh. And the pellet count is over here. Two left, the burst delay and our is explosive damage bool. So the burst delay, let's get that. And that should be over here somewhere. There we have it. And the last one is our boolean for the explosive damage. So get is explosion damage, and let's plug in our final bool over here. And for now, we're simply going to hook it up back to our start fire part, so we can actually test if the firing is working. Okay, so this should be pretty much good to go. Now we do want to go through the list over here because we set up a bunch of defaults, and let's make sure that we clear all the defaults. So that way it's easier to spot if we have an issue in our graphs. So I'm just going to go through the variable list over here and make sure there are no defaults set up. So this should be good. Current burst fire count, that's good. Weapon type, well, that trace is the default enum, so let's change it to trace. Fire time, let's get rid of it. Burst count, so let's zero everything out. Auto fire, turn that off. Burst delay, get rid of it. Not a shotgun, that's good. Get rid of the muzzle socket. Spread, let's zero it out. Pellet count, also zero. Penetration, 0. Damage, 0. The trigger is not set. Muzzle flex, FX, let's clear it. Fire sound, we're also going to clear it. And then we need to clear the montages over here as well. Oh, there we go. And the last one is the projectile class. So that's none. And the explosion damage pool is false. So that should be good. So the defaults are gone and we have our data asset actually tied up to our weapon component. Now we want to open our data assets and make sure that we actually fill in all the new variables that we added. So let's start with the rifle and make sure everything is set up correctly over here. So the mesh, the muzzle flash socket and the muzzle flash FX are already in here. This is going to be a trace weapon. Fire time 0.09, whatever you like. I'm going to set it to burst count 4 and then auto fire. So again, for testing, that's a little bit easier. Burst delay 1.5 seconds, whatever. The spread, let's make it a little bit smaller than it was. So let's make it 5 or something like that. Let's give it a penetration of 1 and then some damage. The fire sound, that's the rifle fire sound cue. Over here. And also our montages, so rifle hip and rifle aim or iron sights. It's not explosion damage, it's not a projectile, and it's not a shotgun, so this should be good to go. And then for our shotgun, let's go through this one as well. So that's a trace weapon. The fire time, let's make it 1.5 seconds maybe. It's not going to be burst. I'm gonna set it to auto fire again for testing. And then let's see, the spread is going to be, well, it's a shotgun, so let's make it 7, something like that. Penetration, make it 1 again, or maybe 2, so it's different and we can see if something actually changed between the shotgun and the rifle. Damage doesn't really matter. And then the fire sounds, shotgun fire. And our montages, so the shotgun hip and the shotgun iron sights. It's not explosion damage, it's not a projectile, and it's a shotgun with 8 pellets, so that's fine, I can live with that. Save that one as well. So now these data assets should actually work, so we can make sure by just giving it a little test. So we still have the rifle selected over here. Well, let's test 2-player, why not? So that still seems to be working, the server is tracing. We can see impact effects. We can hear sounds. There's actually a montage playing, so I think we are pretty good over here. Let's switch it over to the shotgun and see if things actually change. And now we have the shotgun working. And again, I'm seeing impact effects and things like that. There are fire sounds. There's a different montage playing, so it looks like our data asset is working and we have that part set up and good to go. So now I quickly want to show you how you can set up something like a rocket launcher, and we do need a little bit of extra code for that. So that's what I'm going to do for the next part of this video, and then in the next video we're going to start working on the behavior for the combat. So first of all, a simple example, let's add a sniper rifle. So what we could do, we could duplicate a data asset, or you can go to miscellaneous over here and then create a data asset from here. And then you need to select the base, so that's the AI weapon data asset. And let's call this our blueprint data asset for AI weapon. And then it's a sniper rifle. And let's open it up. So we can simply set everything up in here. So we have a sniper rifle mesh, or at least we should have it. There we go. The muzzle socket is the same as with the other weapons, so that's muzzle flash with a capital F and an H at the end. There we go. The muzzle flash FX, there should be a sniper one in here, so sniper muzzle flash. I'm gonna make it a trace weapon, so for the fire time let's make it 2 seconds. It's not going to be burst, it's going to be auto fire for testing purpose. Burst delay 0, spread, well, 1 maybe, it's a sniper, so it should be pretty accurate. Penetration, let's make it something like 2 or 3 maybe. So we could have a little bit of penetration if we want to. Bump up the damage a bit, 20. Then the fire sound, sniper fire. The sound cue. And then for the montages, well, the shotgun ones do pack a bit more punch, but then we have the rechamber animation, so that might look a bit weird. So I'm simply going to go for the rifle hip and the rifle aim montage. It's not explosion damage, it's not a projectile and not a shotgun, so that should be good. So basically we have our weapon set up. Now we do want to go to the weapons folder, and I'm going to duplicate one of these child blueprints. So that's the weapon component. And in here we want to set it up to be our sniper, and then simply open it up. And for the event begin play, make sure we select the correct data asset in here. So this will make sure it's actually sniper. And now we can go to our guard and see if this is working. So that's all you need to do to add a new weapon. And there we go. Now we have a sniper rifle. And you definitely hear a different sound. And there's a 2-second delay instead of 1. So it's definitely a different weapon. So that part works. So that should be good. And now let's make it a little bit more interesting by actually adding a rocket launcher. And for the rocket launcher to work properly, we also need to create a new projectile for the rocket launcher. So that's the first thing that I'm going to do. In the projectile folder, I'm going to create a new child blueprint. So right click the parent projectile and create a child blueprint. And that's going to be the projectile rocket launcher. And let's open it up. So let's go to the components first. Let's see, we want to add a static mesh for the actual rocket. So let's select the collision sphere, add a static mesh. And we can select our rocket ammo in here. Rocket launcher ammo. So there we go, that's actually a rocket. So let's move it back a little bit so the tip is about centered with the collision sphere. And then we want to set up the collision for this static mesh. So we don't want to have collision on the actual mesh. So simply say no collision. It's all working with the collision sphere. So we don't need that. It's actually going to mess things up. Then the capsule size should be good. We want to set the projectile speed probably. So we're going to set the projectile movement over here. And we might want to make it a little bit slower maybe. So that way the player can still dodge it. So 750, you do whatever you like. You can make it faster as well, obviously. And what we also need is the particle for the tracer. So that's over here, and there should be a rocket tracer in here. Rocket launcher trial. So let's select that one. And that should be all for the component part. And now we want to go to the event graph and actually set up some custom stuff. So this rocket is actually going to explode, obviously, so we want to add radial damage instead of our point damage. So that's the main thing that we want to do in here. First of all, let's make sure that we override our impact emitter. So we want to do that after the parent begin play. So in the actual, let's see. Okay, I didn't want to close it. I wanted to open the parent. Thank you. So in the actual parent, we set the impact emitter over here as well to a default. So we want to make sure that we set it after the parent version, otherwise it's going to be overridden. So let's set the impact emitter. And that's going to be the rocket explosion. Rocket launcher explosion. And then we have the overlap events to deal with. So we're going to select our sphere collision. And we're going to add the on component begin overlap. And then we also want to add the component hit event. So on component hit, both of those. And now there is a little side note over here. So let's see. For a normal event in a parent-child blueprint, if I actually place this event begin play, it will stop executing the begin play event on our parent. So this will override the event on the parent. And that's why we can add a call over here to the call to our parent blueprint to also execute that. So if we don't add this node, this stuff over here will not be called. So this actually overrides an event, but that doesn't work the same way for the overlap events over here. So as you can see, we also can't add a call to a parent function. The option simply isn't here. So these events will execute both on the parent and on the child. So both of those logic chains will execute. So you have to take that into account. Otherwise, you might end up doing stuff double or things like that. Okay, so we have the component begin overlap. And first of all, we want to know if we are the server. So let's plug that in over here. And we're actually going to do the same thing for the overlap and the hit event. So we can hook them up both. Is server. And if we are the server, we want to grab our collision sphere and make sure that it doesn't have collision anymore. So set collision, no collision, plug it into the server through pin. And then we want to know if we actually already triggered our explosion. And because we want to multicast that, I'm going to use a rep notify variable again. So let's add a new boolean in here, and that's going to be trigger explosion. It's a bool, and we're going to set it to rep notify. So now we have the rep notify function over here. First of all, let's grab a branch, and we're going to check our current value. And if it's false, we're going to set it to true. There we go. And then all we really need to do is apply our radial damage. So let's do that first, being only on the server side. So apply radial damage. And we can plug in some stuff from our parent projectile, because we can access all of those variables, obviously. So we're going to get the damage, plug it in. The origin is simply going to be the actor location of this projectile. So actor location from ourselves. The damage. Oh wait, we probably want to apply radial damage with fall off, by the way. So this will make it, if you're inside the radial damage radius, you will get the same amount of damage everywhere. And if we do the radial damage with fall off, we can kind of make it like an explosive damage that's less at the end of the sphere. So let's do apply radial damage with fall off. And let's get rid of this one. So for the base damage, we're going to plug in our damage, and then we also need to specify a minimum amount of damage. So I'm simply going to grab the damage divided by 2. And then subtract it from the normal damage. So let's drag off here, subtract, plug in the divide, and plug it in over here. And then we need the origin, so that's the actor location, the damage inner radius. So we can simply set them on our rocket projectile. Because this represents only one projectile, you can choose to add these to the data asset as well, if you want to be more flexible. But then the list of variables on the data asset keeps growing and growing. So that's why I decided to make these ones static, because well, this is a rocket projectile, so you probably don't need to change this. But again, that kind of depends on your setup and what you want. So the outer radius, I'm going to make it 300, the inner radius. Oh, so inner radius 300, outer radius, let's make it 600. Damage fall off, let's set it to 1. So we're not using damage type classes, so we're going to skip that. We don't want to ignore any actors. The damage causer, that's the actual actor that caused the damage. So that's the ourselves, the projectile. So get a reference to ourselves. And instigated by controller, we have the owning controller variable on our parent projectile. So we can get the owning controller and plug it in over here. So you can also specify a damage prevention channel. So if I'm standing behind an object that's being blocked by a visibility channel, then the damage will not be passed on. So you can specify different object channels over here, but I'm simply going to leave it to visibility. That should work. Okay, so now we need to set up the trigger explosion on wrap notify. So let's open that one. And what we want to do in here is grab our static mesh and we're going to delete it. So we don't have the component set to replicate over here, but we're simply executing this on all instances. So we don't really need to replicate the component if we simply destroy it in here. So let's make sure it's valid first. And if it's valid, we're going to destroy the component. And after that, we want to play the impact sound. So let's drag off here and play a sound at location. Make sure we plug in both of these pins. And this is going to be the rocket launcher or rocket explosion. And that's the sound cue again. So the location is the get extra location. And then I'm going to lower the volume a bit, but do whatever you want in there. And that's really all we need to do in here, because we have our parent event. And for the parent, the on projectile stop will actually execute. And then in here, let's see. Oh, the on component hit will execute, or the overlap. Any of them can execute, by the way. And over here, we're setting the projectile impact wrap notify variable. And in here, we're actually playing the explosion FX, so the emitter for the impact. So that should already be working. And over here, begin overlap, we actually have a boolean for the explosion damage. So we're not applying point damage, but we're applying our radial damage over here. So as I mentioned, this will execute both on the parent and the child. So keep that in mind, and you can override events if they are not component overlap events, if that makes sense. Probably not, but there we go. Okay, so that should be set up. Now we want to go into our third person character quickly. So the player character. And we need to make sure that we can receive the radial damage. So we only have the point damage event at this moment. So I'm going to add the radial damage event over here. And for now, I'm simply going to print it to the screen. So that's all I'm going to do to make sure it actually works. So plug it in here, damage received. That's our A pin. And let's change the color for this one, so we know it's actually different. There we go. And now all we need to do is create our primary data asset. So let's go to the data folder and let's create a new weapon. So that's the rocket launcher. And let's make sure everything is set up. So we're going to look for the rocket launcher mesh. Muzzle flash should be fine. The muzzle flash FX is going to be the rocket launcher muzzle flash front. The weapon type is going to be projectile. Then fire time 2 should be fine. Burst count 0. Auto fire for testing purpose again. Spread could be a little bit more probably, so let's make it 3. Penetration is probably not a good idea. Damage, well, let's make it a bit more, 50 maybe. Then we need the fire sound, so that's the rocket launcher fire. Our sound cue. And then the montages, yeah, there's not really stuff for the rocket launcher, so I'm going to use the shotgun ones. May look a little bit weird, but it will have to do. So it's explosion damage, so let's enable this boolean, and then we want to select our rocket projectile over here. And it's not a shotgun, so that should be good. So we can save our data asset. And then we're going to create the actual component. So let's duplicate one over here and rename it. And make sure we select our rocket launcher data asset, compile, save. And that should be all. So now if we go to the weapon in our actual level, we should be able to test it. So let's have a look and see what happens. So let's pick the client. And that was preparing shaders, so it's a little bit jumpy, but after the shaders are compiled, everything looks good. So we have the rocket, we actually have impact FX, we have the correct sounds, so stuff seems to be working, and if he actually hits me, we will get the radial damage as well. So I do see a little bit of an issue over here where the FX is not playing for the client, and I think I know why. So that's because we use the rep notify to actually play the FX, and the actual projectile is being destroyed before the variable is being replicated. So what we want to do, we have that inside of our parents projectile. Projectile impact, particle system tracer, that should be good. So we probably want to make sure that we also hook up this branch over here. Although that doesn't really make sense, by the way, because we're not playing actual FX over here, so ignore that. Let's keep it the way it was. And then, so we're setting it over here. It's explosion damage, and then the penetration is 0, so we're gonna call stop. Okay, so we do need to plug it in over here. So we're calling the trigger for the rep notify over here. Over here we're stopping the projectile, and this will make sure that over here the event fires, and there's no small delay in here, so this will prevent the variable from replicating because the actor is immediately being destroyed. So we do want to hook it up like this, and then it should actually work. So that was a little bit of live debugging over here. And there we have it. So now the FX also plays for the client because the variable is actually being replicated. Okay, so yeah, there we have it. We can easily add new projectiles, new weapons. The setup is pretty decent, and once this is done, you see simply add a data asset, make sure you have a weapon component to match, select it from the drop down, and it should work. Okay, so that's going to be all for today. So in the next video, we're going to start the combat behavior. So we're going to go back to our behavior tree and work with the perception and things like that. So that is going to be a little bit more interesting again. Thanks for watching, everybody. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please consider leaving a like. It really helps the channel. And other than that, see you in the next one. Take care. Bye bye.